At my daughter's wedding, her fiancé pulled out a chair just as I was sitting down, and I fell hard to the floor amid the stifled gasps and sudden laughter of the guests. "Your place is on the floor," he said mockingly, his voice a blade of ice in the warm spring air, humiliating me in front of everyone. But suddenly, the groom's father, a man I hadn't yet met, stood up, his face a mask of shock, and whispered in a voice that carried across the silence, "Sergeant, is that you?" That single moment changed everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The screech of brakes sliced through the crisp January evening as worn tires skidded against the salt-strewn asphalt. A car door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the single-pane windows of my garage. I dropped the heavy wrench I was holding, and it clattered to the floor, sending a splatter of dark motor oil across the stained concrete. A moment later, Alara burst through the side door, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her breath coming in white puffs. "Dad, you won't even believe." She stopped mid-sentence, bouncing on the balls of her feet with an infectious energy that reminded me of when she was 7 years old, desperate to share a secret that felt too big for her small chest. I wiped my greasy hands on an already oil-soaked rag, squinting against the harsh, unforgiving glare of the fluorescent shop lights overhead. The vintage 1968 Triumph Bonneville I'd been painstakingly rebuilding for months sat half-assembled on its lift, engine parts scattered across my workbench like pieces of a complex mechanical puzzle. A draft of frigid Philadelphia air seeped through the gaps around the doorframe, mixing the familiar, comforting smell of motor oil and gasoline with the sharp bite of the winter night. "What's got you so worked up, sweetheart?" I straightened my back, feeling the familiar, deep ache from hours spent hunched over the engine block. Her eyes sparkled brighter than any star in the city sky, catching the light in a way that was instantly mirrored by the new, impossibly large diamond on her left hand. It was bigger than anything I could have ever afforded on a mechanic's salary, bigger than the house we lived in, it seemed. She thrust her phone toward me, her hand nearly vibrating with uncontained excitement. Julian proposed. "Look, Dad, you have to see this video." I set down the rag and took her phone carefully, my calloused, scarred fingers leaving smudges on the pristine screen. The video showed a restaurant I'd only ever seen in magazines, Aurelia, in Rittenhouse Square. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Tables were draped in impossibly white linen, and servers in pressed black uniforms moved with silent, practiced grace. Julian knelt beside a table, his expensive, custom-tailored suit fitting him perfectly. A gold Rolex glinted on his wrist as he presented a velvet ring box with a flourish. "He said we're getting married in April," Alara rushed on, her words tumbling over each other in a breathless cascade. "You'll be so happy for me, Dad. He's everything I've ever dreamed of." I watched the video again, my mechanic's eye for detail catching things she likely missed in her euphoria. I noted how Julian barely glanced at the young waitress who discreetly refilled their water glasses. His gesture was one of dismissal, almost irritation at the interruption. In the background, I caught his voice saying something to someone off camera, the tone dripping with condescension, though I couldn't make out the exact words. "Of course, I'm happy for you, princess," I said, handing back her phone and forcing a smile that felt tight and unnatural on my face. "When do I get to meet his parents?" Alara's laughter, usually so full and warm, had a nervous edge to it as it echoed against the cold garage walls. "Oh, they're traveling in Europe for 2 months, some extended art tour, but they'll be back just before the wedding." She parroted the next line, and I knew it wasn't her own. "Julian says we don't need to wait for them to plan everything." From the street beyond the garage door, the familiar hum of portside traffic provided a steady rhythm. Somewhere down the block, our neighbors, the Garcias, called good night to each other, their friendly voices carrying on the cold air. I picked up another wrench from my toolbox, needing something solid to do with my hands. "That's quite a timeline," I said, keeping my voice deliberately neutral. "April isn't very far away." "I know." She spun around in a circle, her arms outstretched as if she were trying to embrace the entire world. "Julian says When you know, you know. He doesn't believe in wasting time with long engagements. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, a monotonous sound that cast harsh, unflattering shadows across the tools scattered on my workbench. I glanced at the video one more time as Alara held up the phone to admire her own engagement. I watched Julian's face, specifically the fleeting expression he wore when he thought no one was looking. It was a look of smug satisfaction, of conquest. Something about it made my chest tighten with a cold, nameless dread. "Show me that ring again," I said, stepping closer. She extended her hand, and I studied the diamond with a careful eye. It was flawless, certainly expensive, the kind of ring meant to impress, to stake a claim, rather than to express love. The platinum setting was modern, minimalist, and somehow cold, lacking the simple, heartfelt warmth of the plain gold band I had given her mother, Maeve, 28 years ago. "It's beautiful, Alara. Really beautiful, isn't it? He has such amazing taste." She pulled her hand back, twisting it back and forth, admiring the way the massive stone caught and fractured the light. "He wants to take you to dinner tomorrow night at the Gilded Quill, so you two can get to know each other properly." I nodded, my mind already turning to the single good suit hanging in the back of my closet, wondering if it would be nice enough for wherever Julian had in mind. The dark oil stain on my work shirt seemed to deepen suddenly, more obvious under the bright garage lights. "I'd like that," I said, though a profound sense of unease was crawling up my spine like cold fingers. "Just the three of us?" "Yes, his parents won't be back until right before the wedding. But that's perfect, actually. You'll have his full attention." She leaned in and kissed my cheek, leaving behind the faint scent of her expensive perfume mixed with the winter air still clinging to her coat. As she headed toward the door connecting the garage to the house, she paused, her hand on the knob. "Dad, you're going to love him once you really get to know him. I promise." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the half-assembled motorcycle and the unsettling echo of her words. I picked up the wrench again, but my hands had started to shake slightly. The video played once more in my mind. Julian's dismissive gesture, the rushed timeline, the conveniently absent parents. I closed the heavy garage door and headed inside, but the cold feeling settling deep in my chest had nothing to do with the January night. 2 hours later, I sat at the small, cluttered desk in my home office, staring at the computer screen that had taken an eternity to boot up. The framed photo of Maeve smiled at me from its place beside the monitor, her wedding dress as white as fresh snow, her eyes bright with the same unadulterated joy I'd seen in Alara's face tonight. I touched the thin gold chain around my neck, where my wedding ring now hung, hidden beneath my shirt. The metal was warm from my body heat, a constant, tangible reminder of promises made and kept. "I need to know who this boy is, Maeve," I whispered to the photograph. "Help me protect our girl." Facebook loaded with agonizing slowness on my old computer. I found Julian Vance's profile easily enough. Julian Vance, senior partner at Vance and Sterling Venture Capital. His profile picture showed him leaning against a gleaming silver Porsche, expensive sunglasses reflecting the camera's flash, his smile as sharp and polished as a knife's edge. I began to scroll through his posts, each one making my stomach tighten further. Finally found someone who appreciates the finer things. "Moving up." That was posted 3 days ago, accompanied by a photo of an exorbitant restaurant bill. The old generation just doesn't understand modern success. Still living in the past while we're building the future. That was from last week, with dozens of likes from friends whose own profiles showed similar attitudes of casual arrogance. In the comments section of a friend's post about getting a promotion at a local construction company, Julian had written, "Congrats, I guess. Some people are content with ordinary lives. Not me. Ambition matters." My hands clenched into tight fists as I read through more of his public thoughts. Photo after photo of luxury cars, expensive watches, 5-star restaurants. But it wasn't the money that bothered me. I wasn't naive. It was the attitude that dripped from every caption, every comment. The deep-seated disdain he held for people who worked with their hands, who built things, who served others. A post from December caught my eye. upgrading my lifestyle one smart choice at a time. Sometimes you have to leave your past behind to step into your future. The comments were filled with fawning encouragement from friends who seemed to share his transactional values. One person had asked about his new girl, and Julian had replied with a comment that made the blood freeze in my veins. She's perfect, sweet, trusting, and her father's exactly the kind of simple man who won't complicate things. Simple man. The words hit me like a physical blow. I leaned back heavily in my chair, the old springs groaning in protest under my weight. Around me, the small office, a room filled with a lifetime of memories, suddenly felt suffocating. Family photos covered the walls. Alara's graduation, her first tiny apartment, countless birthday parties where she'd blown out candles while I cheered from behind the camera. In every single picture, it was just the two of us. No extended family, no safety net beyond what I could provide with my own two hands. My military commendations hung in a simple, unpretentious frame near the bookshelf, but I rarely looked at them anymore. That part of my life felt distant now, like it belonged to another man in another lifetime. What mattered was the solemn promise I'd made to Maeve on the day Alara was born, and again on the day I lost her. I would protect our daughter from anyone and anything that might hurt her. I clicked through more of Julian's photos. Him at charity galas, but always positioned to show off the label of his expensive suit rather than the cause he was supposedly supporting. Pictures from work functions where he stood slightly apart from his colleagues, his body language screaming that he considered himself above their company. In one photo from a company retreat, he had written a caption that made my skin crawl. Networking with the right people. It's not what you know, it's who you know, and how to use them. Use them. The phrase echoed in the quiet of the house. The house was silent around me, settling into the night with its familiar creaks and groans. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Garcia next door watching her evening telenovela, the dramatic, swelling music drifting through the cold winter air, the normal, comforting sounds of a normal neighborhood, where people looked out for each other and worked honest jobs for honest pay. I thought about Alara's radiant face tonight, how completely she trusted this man. She had inherited her mother's beautiful, dangerous ability to see the best in people, to believe that love could conquer all obstacles. It was one of the things I cherished most about her, and now it terrified me. My own reflection stared back at me from the dark window pane. Graying hair, a weathered face, hands that showed decades of honest, hard work. Everything Julian Vance seemed to despise about my generation. But those hands had held my daughter when she cried, had taught her to ride a bicycle, and had worked countless double shifts to pay for her college education. I closed the laptop and sat there in the darkness for a long moment. Tomorrow night I would meet Julian face to face. I would look him in the eye and see if the man matched the arrogant, dismissive voice in these posts. I would give him a chance, for Alara's sake, to prove my gut feelings wrong. But if he was what these posts suggested, if he saw my daughter as just another acquisition, another beautiful piece to add to his collection, another step up his social ladder, then I would have to find a way to protect her without shattering her faith in love itself. The photograph of Maeve seemed to nod in the dim light from the street lamp outside. I touched the wedding ring beneath my shirt one more time, drawing strength from the cool, familiar metal that had witnessed decades of unwavering devotion. Tomorrow, I would begin to learn exactly what kind of man wanted to marry my daughter. The taxi pulled away from the curb on a cobblestone street in Rittenhouse Square, leaving me standing before the imposing facade of the Gilded Quill. Massive, ornate chandeliers gleamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, and a doorman in white gloves and a top hat gestured toward the entrance with practiced, theatrical elegance. I adjusted my tie one final time, feeling the crushing weight of every dollar this place would cost. A place designed to make men like me feel small. Inside, marble floors polished to a mirror shine reflected the soft, golden glow of amber lighting. Other diners spoke in hushed, reverent tones, their clothing worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. The hostess, a young woman with perfect posture and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, looked me up and down with a barely concealed, swift assessment. "Vance party," I said, keeping my voice steady and even. She led me through a maze of tables where men wore watches that caught the light like small suns and women were draped in jewelry that sparkled with every subtle gesture. I spotted Ilara immediately. Her face lit up as she waved enthusiastically from a plush, semicircular booth in the corner. Beside her sat Julian, casually checking his phone with the bored indifference of someone who was accustomed to keeping others waiting. "Dad!" Ilara stood as I approached, but Julian remained seated until the last possible moment, rising slowly, languidly, as if the effort inconvenienced him greatly. "Mr. O'Connell." His handshake was limp, dismissive, lasting just long enough to avoid being outright rude. "Ilara has told me so much about you." The way he said it suggested she had told him far too much for his comfort. "Likewise," I replied, settling into the cushioned seat across from them. "Congratulations on your engagement." Julian's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Thank you. We're very excited about our future together." He signaled the waiter with an imperious flick of his fingers. "The sommelier, and we'll be having the 2005 Cheval Blanc. Bottle service. No consultation, no asking for preferences." The waiter nodded with deep deference and vanished. "So, Mr. O'Connell." Julian leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers like a man conducting an interview. "Ilara tells me you work with your hands. That must be very satisfying." The deliberate pause before the word satisfying carried volumes of condescension. "I'm a mechanic," I said simply. "I fix things that are broken." How refreshingly honest. His laugh had sharp, cutting edges. "I'm in venture capital myself. Portfolio management, high-stakes investments. A different world entirely, I suppose." Ilara reached across the table to squeeze my hand, a small, reassuring gesture. "Dad rebuilt his motorcycle completely from scratch. It's beautiful, a vintage Triumph from the 60s. Motorcycles." Julian ostentatiously checked his Rolex. "A dangerous hobby for a man your age, wouldn't you say? Though I suppose different generations have different ideas about appropriate risks." The wine arrived, and Julian performed an elaborate tasting ritual while the sommelier waited with bated breath. He finally nodded his approval as if he were bestowing a great honor, then gestured for our glasses to be filled without asking if we even wanted wine. "Ilara's been telling me about your quaint neighborhood in Portside," he continued, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass. "So authentic, very working class. I imagine the sense of community must compensate for the other limitations." "What limitations?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Julian's smile widened, sensing an opening. "Oh, nothing specific. Just that once you've experienced certain standards of living, it becomes difficult to appreciate the simpler pleasures. But that's generational, I think. Your generation values different things." "My generation," I repeated, the condescension dripping like poison from a broken jar. "Such as?" "Traditional values, I suppose," he said smoothly. "Hard work for its own sake rather than working smart. Loyalty to outdated concepts rather than adapting to modern realities." He gestured grandly around the opulent restaurant. "Places like this, for instance. Your generation might see it as wasteful extravagance, while we see it as an investment in experiences that matter." Ilara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Julian, Dad appreciates nice things too." "Of course he does," Julian interrupted, his voice like silk covering steel. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's just about different perspectives on value and success." He turned his full attention back to me. "Tell me, Mr. O'Connell, what do you consider your greatest achievement?" The question was a trap, beautifully constructed and sprung. If I answered with pride, he would find a way to diminish it. If I answered with humility, he would interpret it as proof of my limited ambition. "Raising Ilara," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Admirable," he nodded, but his eyes held a cold calculation. "Single parenthood must have been incredibly challenging. Limited resources, I imagine. No wonder Ilara appreciates having someone who can provide properly for her future." The words hit like a series of physical blows, each one precisely aimed to wound. Alara's face flushed a deep crimson. Julian, please? What? I'm simply acknowledging your father's sacrifices. And now that I'm in the picture, those days of struggle are over. Alara deserves the finer things in life. Don't you agree, Mr. O'Connell? I gripped my linen napkin under the table until my knuckles went white. Around us, crystal clinked against fine china, creating a soundtrack of wealth and privilege that suddenly felt utterly suffocating. The waiter approached with heavy, leather-bound menus, but Julian waved him away with a flick of his wrist. Actually, I believe we're ready for the check. The waiter returned a moment later with a small leather folder, placing it beside Julian's elbow with practiced discretion. Through the crystal and candlelight, I watched my daughter's fiancé examine the bill with theatrical attention, his eyebrows rising in mock surprise. Well now, he said, sliding the check slowly, deliberately across the white tablecloth toward me. I believe tradition dictates that the bride's father handles the dinner. The number on the bill made my stomach plummet. $482. More than I spent on groceries in a month. Julian, that's not necessary. Alara started, her voice strained and thin. Nonsense, sweetheart. He waved her objection away without even looking at her, his eyes fixed on my face like a predator watching its cornered prey. Your father wants to show his support for our engagement. Don't you, Mr. O'Connell? The silence stretched between us, thin and taut like a wire under tension. Other diners continued their quiet conversations, oblivious to the slow-motion disaster unfolding at our corner table. Of course, Julian continued, leaning back in his chair with a look of deep satisfaction. Your generation probably doesn't understand modern courtesies. In my circle, this is simply how things are done. My hands trembled almost imperceptibly as I reached for my wallet. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, a working man's wallet that had never held the kind of money this restaurant expected as a matter of course. I could feel Alara watching me, her face pale and stricken in the candlelight. Dad, please, I can. No. I placed my credit card on top of the check, sending up a silent prayer that the transaction would go through. It's fine, princess. Julian's smile was triumphant. Excellent. I do appreciate a man who understands proper protocol. He checked his phone again, scrolling through messages as if the moment of my public humiliation was already a forgotten, trivial matter. The wedding day arrived under a perfect April sky. Sunshine filtered through the budding branches of ancient oak trees at the Beaumont estate, casting dappled, dancing shadows across the rows of white chairs. I stood at the edge of the reception area, tugging at the collar of my jacket, the same navy suit from Alara's college graduation, now feeling woefully inadequate among the sea of designer formalwear. Guests mingled in polished clusters, their champagne flutes catching the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. I recognized almost no one beyond a few of Alara's college friends, who offered polite, distant waves from across the manicured lawn. Everyone else belonged to Julian's world. The ceremony itself had been beautiful. Alara glowed in her mother's wedding dress, which she'd had altered. The delicate lace Maeve had chosen 40 years ago had been transformed into something that honored both the past and the present. When the officiant asked who gave this woman, I stood with a pride that swelled in my chest, despite the tight, heavy knot in my stomach, knowing what this reception likely held in store for me. As dinner service began, I found my assigned seat. Table 18, as far from the head table as possible, wedged between Alara's elderly great-aunt and a couple I didn't recognize. The message was unmistakable. Family, but barely. That's when I saw Julian approaching, his predator's smile firmly in place, his eyes glittering with malicious intent. He moved behind my chair just as I was preparing to sit down. Mr. O'Connell, he said, his voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. I was just telling some colleagues about the diverse backgrounds represented here today. A real lesson in sociology. I began to lower myself into the chair, one hand on each armrest, when I felt a sharp, violent pull. The chair was jerked backward just as my weight committed to sitting, sending me crashing ungracefully to the polished flagstone floor. The impact knocked the wind clean from my lungs. A tearing sound echoed as the shoulder seam of my jacket ripped. Around me, conversation died instantly. 100 heads turned toward the sound. "Oops," Julian said, his voice carrying clearly across the sudden, shocked quiet. "Looks like someone's getting a bit unsteady on their feet. Age catches up to all of us, eventually." But his eyes blazed with raw triumph. His mask had slipped completely. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable closer to ground level anyway. Your place is on the floor." Gasps rippled through the nearby tables. From across the reception area, I heard Alara's cry of pure distress as she saw me on the ground. She rushed toward me, her bouquet falling forgotten to the grass. I lay there for a heartbeat, stunned, the air thick with the silent judgment of 100 wealthy strangers. It was in that moment of profound humiliation that I heard a voice behind me, one I hadn't yet heard that day. "Marcus, hurry. We're already so late." The late arrivals, a distinguished couple who still showed signs of a hasty, stressful journey, entered through the main garden archway. The man moved with an unmistakable military bearing, despite his civilian tuxedo. His eyes, practiced and sharp, scanned the reception, taking in the scene with the speed of a battlefield assessment. The uncomfortable silence, the scattered guests, my daughter kneeling beside me, and the groom standing over us with a smug look on his face. "Julian, there you are." A woman near the entrance waved with relief. "We were so worried about the flight delay." But the man, General Marcus Vance, had stopped moving entirely. His attention was locked on me as Alara helped me to my feet. Something about the way I held my shoulders, even in my disheveled state, triggered a memory buried deep within him, a reflex forged in the crucible of combat. "It can't be," he whispered, leaving his wife's side and striding across the lawn with a purpose that silenced the remaining whispers. I was trying to dust off my torn jacket when I heard the sound of dress shoes crossing the stone with the cadence of combat boots. The sound of a man who had spent decades learning to move with authority and intention. "Sir." The voice cut through the stunned murmurs of the guests. "Sergeant, is that really you?" I looked up from straightening my tie to find a face I hadn't seen in 20 years. It was older, etched with lines of command and time, but it was unmistakable. The gray at his temples hadn't been there before, but the eyes held the same steady, unwavering intelligence I remembered from dusty desert outposts and moonless midnight patrols. "General Vance?" The name escaped my lips before I could stop it. The man I had known as Captain Vance. His face transformed, first with recognition, and then with something deeper, something far more profound. It was the bone-deep, life-altering gratitude of a man whose life had been saved and who had never, for 1 second, forgotten it. "Sergeant O'Connell," he breathed. "I can't believe it. What in God's name are you doing here?" Around us, guests leaned closer, sensing a high-stakes drama but not yet understanding its source. Julian stood frozen, his look of triumph curdling into utter confusion as his own father approached the man he had just publicly humiliated with a look of pure reverence. "This is my daughter's wedding," I said quietly, glancing toward Alara, who was watching our impossible reunion with wide-eyed, dawning amazement. General Vance's eyes widened as the impossible, astronomical coincidence registered. His gaze swung from me to his son, and back to me, his mind processing implications that would reshape everything he thought he knew about this day, this wedding, his own son. "Your daughter," he began, then stopped as the full understanding hit him like a physical blow. His voice rose, carrying across the reception with the practiced projection of a man trained to command troops in the field. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need your attention." The authority in his tone commanded immediate, absolute silence. Waiters paused mid-stride. The string quartet lowered their instruments. "I need everyone here to understand something." He strode to my side and placed a hand on my shoulder, not as a superior officer, but as a brother. "This man," he declared, his voice ringing with emotion, "is Sergeant Liam O'Connell, United States Army. In August of 2004, outside a forward operating base in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, our patrol was ambushed. Insurgents overran our position. His wife, Nancy, appeared at his side, her eyes filling with tears of understanding as she looked between her husband and the man who was the hero of the story she had heard 1,000 times. I was wounded, pinned down under heavy enemy fire. The general's voice was thick with emotion that 20 years had not diminished. This man, this hero, disregarded his own safety and ran through active gunfire to pull me to safety. He carried me 300 yards through a kill zone to the medevac point. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward me with a new, dawning awareness, recontextualizing everything they had just witnessed. The man on the floor was not some working-class embarrassment. He was a decorated war hero who had earned his honor in blood and courage. I recommended him for the Silver Star, General Vance continued, his voice cracking with pride. For gallantry in action, for saving the life of a fellow soldier when any reasonable man would have sought cover. Julian's face had gone as white as desert sand. His mouth worked soundlessly as the catastrophic magnitude of his miscalculation became clear. The simple mechanic he had been tormenting for months was a war hero, decorated for displaying a kind of courage that Julian could not even begin to comprehend. "He never told me," Alara whispered, but her voice carried in the stunned silence. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked at me with new, wondrous eyes. "Dad, you never said anything about." "I just did my job, Princess," I interrupted, deeply uncomfortable with the sudden, intense focus. "Any soldier would have done the same." "No, Sergeant, not any soldier." The general's voice was firm. "You saved my life. You're the reason I came home to my wife. You're the reason I got to see my son grow up. You are the reason I am standing here today." He turned to face Julian, and his eyes, once filled with a father's pride, now carried a disappointment so profound it was like a physical wound. "This man is the reason our family exists, Julian. He is a genuine American hero, and I have just witnessed my own son treat him with anything less than the profound, absolute respect he has earned." The reception area buzzed with frantic, whispered conversations as the guests processed the stunning revelation. Wine glasses sat forgotten on linen tablecloths as people stared at the man in the torn jacket who had carried their host's father to safety under a hail of enemy fire. From her position beside me, Alara reached for my hand, her fingers squeezing mine with a fierce, unwavering pride and a love that felt deeper than ever before. "Welcome home, Sergeant," General Vance said formally, snapping to attention in his tuxedo, a soldier honoring his savior one last time. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until Julian finally moved. He stepped forward, his face ashen but his eyes filled with a new, terrible clarity. The confident, arrogant predator who had orchestrated my humiliation had vanished, replaced by a young man forced to confront the wreckage of his own character. He moved toward the microphone the band had been using for announcements. I need to say something." His voice carried across the lawn, amplified for everyone to hear. "What happened here tonight, what I did, was inexcusable. I have spent months treating this man with disrespect and contempt, and I just learned why that makes me not just wrong, but despicable. His father had told you that Sergeant O'Connell saved his life. What he didn't tell you is that for months, I've been treating this war hero like he was beneath me, because he's a mechanic, because he lives in Portside instead of Rittenhouse Square, because I was too insecure and too profoundly stupid to see past my own pathetic prejudices." He took a deep breath, his confession growing more painful with each admission. "I made fun of his work, his values, his home. I forced him to pay for a dinner that cost a week's wages, just to watch him squirm. And tonight I pulled his chair out from under him and told him his place was on the floor." A wave of audible gasps and angry murmurs swept the reception. "And why?" Julian continued, his voice raw with self-loathing. "Because I was afraid that I would never measure up to my own father's legacy of service. Afraid that Alara would see that I'm not half the man her father is. So I tried to tear down a man who deserves nothing but honor and respect." He turned away from the microphone, facing me directly, his eyes pleading. Mr. O'Connell, Sergeant O'Connell, I am so profoundly sorry. You saved my father's life, and I repaid that sacred debt by trying to destroy you in front of your daughter. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I am begging you for the chance to earn it. The reception area was completely still, every eye fixed on the public dismantling of a man's pride in service of his conscience. I want to learn from your example, he said, his voice finally breaking. I want to become the kind of man who deserves to be part of your family, the kind of man who protects and honors what truly matters, instead of attacking it out of fear. Tears streamed down Alara's face as she watched her new husband strip away every pretense, laying his flaws bare for the world to see. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of Maeve's ring against my chest, and the promise I had made to protect our daughter. But I understood now that protection sometimes meant teaching others how to love her properly. Son, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the silence. It takes far more courage to admit your mistakes publicly than it does to make them privately. What matters now isn't what you did. It's what you choose to do from this moment forward. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief flooded his features as I extended my hand, not for a handshake, but to pull him into the embrace his raw, honest apology had earned. Family means we support each other through everything, I said quietly, for his ears alone. The good times and the times when we fall short of who we want to be. Welcome to our family. And thank you for loving my daughter enough to become worthy of her. As slow, hesitant applause began to build into a crescendo, I felt Maeve's presence as surely as if she were standing beside me. Our daughter had chosen well after all. Not the man Julian had been, but the man he was fighting to become. The band, sensing a shift, began to play a soft melody. Couples moved toward the dance floor, and somewhere in the gardens of the Beaumont estate, the flowering trees sang their eternal, hopeful song of growth and second chances. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.